Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
The sun crept slowly over the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the capital city. In the distance, the iconic skyline seemed unchanged, but today wasn't like any other day. The day had arrived when democracy itself would evolve, transcending centuries of tradition. Inside the lab, Dr. Evelyn Carter stared at the massive screen displaying intricate graphs and charts. Her heart pounded with anticipation as her invention, the opinion reader, would soon change the course of human history. Evelyn had spent years perfecting this device, working tirelessly to create a system that would eliminate the confusion and dishonesty that often plagued elections. People no longer had to articulate their choices through a ballot or be swayed by campaign rhetoric. The opinion reader would go beyond the surface, uncovering what people truly wanted, even if they couldn't, or wouldn't, admit it themselves. Today, that technology was in play across the nation. Every citizen would cast their vote, not with their hands, but with their minds. The media had hailed it as the pinnacle of democratic evolution. Politicians had lined up to endorse it, convinced that this system would ensure they represented the people's deepest desires. For Evelyn, it was a triumph of science, a moment where intellect and human nature would intersect in ways that had never been possible. But deep down, as she stared at the monitor, Evelyn felt the slightest twinge of doubt. Could this really work as intended? Her assistant, Jared, entered the room with a tense smile. Everything is operational, Dr. Carter. We're in the final countdown. Ready? She nodded, but the gnawing feeling persisted. Of course. Let's make history. The city outside had turned silent, as citizens across the nation connected themselves to the opinion reader's interface. It was an elegant, nearly invisible process. People went about their day, their thoughts automatically feeding into the vast network of sensors scattered through phones, computers, and even smart home devices. All Evelyn had to do now was wait. Hours passed, and the data streamed in. Evelyn's screen was alive with information, lines fluctuating, votes being cast, the system processing billions of thoughts simultaneously. Early indicators pointed toward a typical outcome. The two leading candidates, Senator Linda Murphy and Governor Jonathan Diaz, were neck and neck in the polls, just as expected. Both had spent years cultivating the public's trust, representing their party's ideals flawlessly, but then, something strange happened. The system began to show an anomaly. A third name was emerging. A candidate no one had predicted, and certainly one no one had seriously considered. Marcus Thorne, a political outsider, who had barely managed to get his name on the ballot, suddenly shot up in the rankings. Thorne was unconventional, to say the least. He ran a campaign based on dismantling the government structure, appealing to disillusionment, frustration, and the public's hidden anxieties about the future. Yet his policies were extreme, far outside the mainstream. Few had taken him seriously, until now. The numbers on the screen didn't lie. Thorne was surging, and the reason was clear. The opinion reader was exposing what no one had seen before, the subconscious desires of the populace. People wanted change, real, radical change. The calm facade that most voters had shown in their public lives belied a much deeper unrest. Many of them, it seemed, craved the upheaval that Thorne promised. They might not have admitted it in public, but their innermost thoughts betrayed them. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Jared, watching alongside her, blinked in disbelief. "Is this real?" he asked. "It has to be," she replied, though uncertainty gripped her. "The system is working. It's showing what people truly want." "But Marcus Thorne?" Jared shook his head. "It doesn't make sense." He's dangerous. If he wins, he's going to win, Evelyn interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. She could see the projection taking shape. There was no doubt. Marcus Thorne would be elected president. Outside the lab, the streets were already alive with confusion. News anchors struggled to explain the sudden rise of Thorne, the shock evident in their voices. Crowds gathered, some cheering, others standing in stunned silence. Social media platforms exploded with disbelief, anger, and excitement. Was this truly what democracy had come to? Had the people really wanted someone like Marcus Thorne all along? Inside her office, Evelyn wrestled with the reality she had created. She had imagined the opinion reader as the perfect democratic tool, a way to bypass the deceptions and complexities of modern elections. But now, the very technology she had designed seemed to be exposing a darker side of human nature. People's subconscious minds were far more conflicted and chaotic than anyone had anticipated. As the final tally approached, the streets turned chaotic. Protests began to form as Marcus Thorne's name solidified its place at the top of the leaderboard. Crowds marched, some in support of the results, others vehemently opposed. Thorne's controversial campaign, which had once seemed like an afterthought, was now the center of national debate. His promises to rebuild from the ashes struck fear into the hearts of many, but for others, it was a long overdue correction. In the midst of this growing turmoil, Evelyn tried to reach out to her colleagues. A hastily arranged video conference linked her with the leading minds behind the project. On the screen, faces filled with concern and confusion mirrored her own. "We need to shut it down," one of her colleagues, Dr. Patel, suggested. "The system is clearly malfunctioning. We can't let someone like Thorne become president." Evelyn shook her head, though a part of her wanted to agree. "It's not malfunctioning. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is what people really want, whether we like it or not." "But how can this be?" Dr. Reynolds, another scientist, asked. "Thorne's ideas are insane. How can he represent the will of the people?" Evelyn sighed. "The opinion reader doesn't filter out people's subconscious desires. It captures everything, every conflicting, chaotic impulse. We thought we'd find a clear majority opinion, but humans are more complicated than that. We're not just rational beings. We're driven by fear, anger, desires we don't fully understand ourselves. And that's why Thorne is winning?" Reynolds asked, incredulous. "Yes," Evelyn admitted. "He taps into something deeper. People want stability, but they also crave change, even destruction, when they feel threatened or uncertain about the future. Thorne is the embodiment of that contradiction." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. The scientists exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the implications. The system had done what it was supposed to do, reveal the true will of the people. But it had also revealed a disturbing truth about human nature. Deep down, people wanted more than just a functioning government. They wanted something primal, something raw. The election ended as Evelyn had predicted. Marcus Thorne was declared the winner. The announcement sent shockwaves through the nation. News anchors struggled to contain their disbelief, while the streets erupted in both celebration and violence. Some hailed Thorne as a revolutionary figure, the first president who truly represented the people's will. Others decried him as a dangerous demagogue who would lead the country into chaos. In the days that followed, the country was plunged into a state of unrest. Thorne's supporters organized rallies, praising the election as the ultimate expression of democracy. Detractors filled the streets, demanding a recount or even the removal of the opinion reader system altogether. Social media became a battleground, with people torn between their public personas and the uncomfortable truths the election had revealed about their own inner desires. Inside the lab, Evelyn watched it all unfold with growing dread. This was not the future she had envisioned. The election had exposed a fundamental flaw, not just in her system, but in the concept of democracy itself. How could a system truly represent the people's will if that will was so fractured and contradictory? Jared, sensing her distress, entered her office. "I'm sorry, Dr. Carter. I know this isn't what you expected." Evelyn stared out the window, watching the crowd swell in the streets below. "No, it's not," she said softly. "But maybe it's what we needed. Maybe we needed to see the truth." "What truth?" "That democracy, as we know it, is based on an illusion. We thought we were electing leaders based on rational choices, but it's more complicated than that. People are complicated." The opinion reader didn't fail, it did exactly what it was designed to do. It just showed us something we weren't ready to see. The next few weeks were a blur of protests, debates, and political maneuvering. Thorne was sworn in as president amid a backdrop of uncertainty and fear. His first address to the nation was met with both applause and outrage. He spoke about tearing down the old system, about rebuilding the country from the ground up. To his supporters, he was a visionary. To his detractors, he was a madman. Evelyn watched it all from the sidelines, knowing she had played a part in creating this new reality. The opinion reader had revealed the truth, but in doing so, it had also exposed the fragile nature of human society. People were not as rational as they believed themselves to be. Deep down, they were driven by forces they didn't fully understand: fear, anger, desire for control. Evelyn's world had narrowed to the constant hum of the news feeds and the haunting rhythm of protest chants outside her office window. The crowds, once uncertain, now seemed to have split into two distinct factions: those who celebrated the election as the purest form of democracy and those who viewed it as its downfall. Marcus Thorne had taken office, his dark promises and divisive rhetoric already shaping the future. In the days since the inauguration, Evelyn hadn't slept much. She replayed the election data in her mind, trying to pinpoint where it had all gone wrong. But no matter how many times she examined the figures, the results were undeniable. Thorne was exactly what the people had wanted, what they truly, deeply desired, even if they couldn't admit it. The opinion reader had exposed a layer of human consciousness that no one, including herself, had been prepared to face. Jared entered the lab quietly, his face pale with concern. He had been by her side throughout the entire process, but lately, even he seemed unsure of what to say. "There's another protest forming outside. Bigger than before." Evelyn nodded, barely looking up. "I saw the reports. It's getting worse." "It's not just the protests," Jared said, his voice tight. "There's talk in Congress. Some are calling for Thorne's removal from office. They're saying the election was rigged, or that the system was flawed." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "The system wasn't flawed," she muttered, almost to herself. "It worked. That's the problem." Jared hesitated, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I know. But the public doesn't see it that way. People are scared, Evelyn. Thorne's talking about dismantling half the government, pulling out of international agreements, shutting down critical institutions. He's acting on those subconscious fears and desires you talked about, but no one thought it would lead to this. The country's on the brink." She turned to face him, eyes tired and hollow. "What do they expect me to do?" This was supposed to improve democracy, to give people a voice. Now they want me to fix it? Jared shifted uncomfortably. I think they're expecting an explanation. Or a solution. They need someone to make sense of all this. Evelyn stood and paced the room. There's no easy explanation. Human nature is complex. The opinion reader didn't malfunction, it revealed a truth we didn't want to see. People don't just want stability and order. They want change, they want chaos, they want contradictions. Thorn is a reflection of that. But how do we deal with it? Jared pressed. What if the system wasn't the right answer? What if we never should have? We did it, Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising. We created the system. We opened Pandora's box. And now, we have to live with it. The conversation hung in the air between them, heavy with the implications of what they had done. Jared, for all his loyalty and support, seemed lost, just like everyone else. And Evelyn, once so confident in her work, felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She knew Thorn's presidency was only the beginning. His policies, already extreme, would become even more so. He was a man who thrived on the turmoil of the people. He represented their deepest fears and wildest desires, and he was about to tear the system apart from the inside. The people had chosen him, and now they would reap the consequences. A week later, the streets were no longer just filled with protests, they were filled with violence. Clashes between Thorn's supporters and his detractors erupted across major cities. The media struggled to cover the chaos as riot police tried, and often failed, to maintain order. Thorn's promises of dismantling government agencies, restructuring the judiciary, and even slashing military funding had ignited a firestorm. In the Oval Office, Thorn reveled in the upheaval. His speeches were brash and inflammatory, calling his opponents traitors, dismissing their concerns as the cries of the bold guard. Every move he made was calculated to sow division, to push the nation deeper into crisis. He was dismantling the very structures that had held the country together for centuries, and with every strike, his power grew. Evelyn watched in horror. Her invention had unleashed a president who thrived on chaos, and now she was powerless to stop it. The breaking point came when Thorn moved to enact sweeping emergency powers. Under the guise of restoring order, he sought to consolidate control over the military, bypass Congress, and silence opposition media. It was a power grab that even his supporters had not anticipated. As the news broke, Evelyn sat frozen in her lab, watching the televised chaos unfold. Thorn's voice, deep and commanding, filled the room as he addressed the nation from behind the presidential podium. My fellow citizens, the time has come to take control of our future. For too long, this country has been ruled by fear and stagnation. I will not allow the weak-willed to dictate our destiny any longer. I am enacting emergency powers to restore peace and security. This is what you, the people, have chosen. This is your will. Evelyn could barely breathe as the words washed over her. This was not democracy. This was a nightmare. Thorn's election, driven by the opinion reader, had laid bare the worst aspects of human desire, and now the country was descending into something far darker than anyone had imagined. Jared burst into the room, his face pale. Evelyn, we have to do something. What can we do? She whispered, barely able to form the words. It's too late. No, Jared insisted. It's not too late. We can shut down the opinion reader, stop the influence it has over the government. We can expose the truth, that this was never what people truly wanted. Evelyn shook her head. It's not the opinion reader's fault. It's just a tool. It didn't create Thorn. People did. Jared's voice rose, desperate. But the people didn't know what they were asking for. You said it yourself, human desires are too complex, too contradictory. They didn't want this. Not really. We can prove it. Evelyn stared at him, the weight of her decision pressing down like a physical force. Could she undo what had been done? Could she dismantle the very system she had built, the one that had exposed the truth about human nature? And if she did, would it even matter? But as the sounds of sirens and breaking glass echoed from the streets below, Evelyn knew she had no choice. The country was unraveling, and it was partly her fault. With trembling hands, she turned back to her computer. The opinion reader's vast network, once her crowning achievement, now appeared as a tangle of data points and connections, a machine that had revealed too much. She could shut it down, erase the data, hide the truth once more, but even as she began the process, a sick feeling settled in her gut. This wasn't a solution. It was only a band-aid on a wound far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The next day, Marcus Thorne stood before the nation once again. But this time, his voice wasn't the booming, confident tone that had rallied his supporters. Instead, it was quieter, more restrained. Something had shifted. Evelyn had done it. The opinion reader had been shut down, and with it, the psychological force driving Thorne's rise to power. The country was still in chaos, but the fervor that had propelled Thorne had begun to wane. People were waking up, realizing that the person they had elected didn't reflect their true, conscious desires. The subconscious pull that had brought Thorne to power had weakened, leaving many questioning their decisions. In the days that followed, Congress moved to limit Thorne's emergency powers, and a series of investigations were launched into the election process. Public confidence in the government was shattered, but there was a glimmer of hope that perhaps the system could be repaired. Evelyn sat alone in her lab, watching the news as the tide began to turn. She had destroyed the opinion reader, but the damage it had caused would take years to undo. The world had seen the truth about human nature, and now there was no going back. Thorne's presidency would go down in history as one of the most tumultuous, a cautionary tale about the dangers of giving people what they think they want, rather than what they truly need. And Evelyn, once a celebrated scientist, was left with the knowledge that she had forever changed the course of democracy, for better or worse.